So, as Paul introduced me to you. My name is Yair Davidiy. I represent Brit-Am Hebrew Awareness. I'm speaking to you from the land of Israel. I live in the land of Israel. This is the Holy Land, the land of the Bible. This is the land where Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob were, where the Hebrew nations began. And we understand through studies of the Bible, studies of rabbinical sources, studies of archaeological sources of history, that the lost 10 tribes are now to be found amongst Western peoples. The lost 10 tribes are the majority, numerically, they would have been the majority of the ancient Hebrews. You had 12 tribes of Israel. You had 12 tribes of Israel, and 10 of them seceded. They separated. They set up their own kingdoms, their own policy, their own nation, one could say. And they have separate histories in the Bible. A good portion of the book of Kings, of the 2 books of Kings, concerns the history of the 10 tribes as separate nations, a separate kingdom from Judah. Judah represented the tribes of Judah, of Benjamin, of Levi, and minorities of the other tribes. But it was different. It was separate. It was more religious. It was centered around the temple. It was centered around belief in the Torah and keeping the commandments. Whereas the northern kingdom was more lax, more liberal, one could say. And eventually, it departed altogether from worshipping the one God of Israel and began to worship pagan idols as described in the book of Kings, 2nd book of Kings, chapter 17. In detail it describes how they went after the way the pagan nations around them. They worshipped all kinds of gods and idols. They sacrificed to these idols, even sacrificed men and women to these idols. And they did what the Canaanite peoples did. It's all there in detail. For this is the reason, or one of the reasons they were exiled. God Almighty punished them by exiling them. And that is what happened to them. They were taken away by the Assyrians. They were captured and exiled. And they lost consciousness, they lost awareness of where they had come from, of their origins, and they even intermixed with other nations, and they became virtually pagans, virtually non-Israelites, whilst they were still in the land of Israel. And the 2nd book of Kings, chapter 17, speaks of this at some length. And so they were taken away, exiled, and as the prophets mentioned, they were considered not my people. You see the book of Hosea, they're considered not my people. Not part of my heritage. And they were scattered or spread out amongst the peoples. But they, even though it sounds somewhat contradictory, they remained together. They retained the cohesion, a certain national cohesion. And in their places of exile, they linked up, they came in contact with other people, such as the Cimmerians and the Scythians. And they became part of their federations, or at least part of them did. And then there were wars and revolutions and different changes in the international situation. And eventually, they all moved out. They all migrated. They migrated to the west, to the north, and eventually they came. They came to Western Europe, and from there they found the USA, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and related places. And they had a task to fulfill. The book of Isaiah mentions that everyone would be assimilated amongst the exiles, amongst the Gentiles, in order to elevate them from within, and that is what they have done. But even in their places of exile, they still retained certain characteristics that testify to their Israelite origin. So one of these characteristics is their names, their very names, their national names. Their national names, and when we first come across them, we first come across Western peoples. We come across Western peoples, first come across the Celts. That is, we come across the Celtic peoples, first were Celtic, so-called people of Celtic culture, and then these were replaced or joined onto. They lost power to, but though many of them remained where they were joined onto by people who spoke a Germanic tongue, or Scandinavian tongues related to Germanic, but these were not racially or the genealogy did not trace them to the Germans, or at least did not trace them to most of the Germans. So the ones who were there first, who were in these areas where they came to, Western Europe, are known as Celts after their culture, more concerning their culture. And the Celtic lands were divided into three different sections. The section is known as Celtai, as the Celts, the Galatai, and the Belgae. They are the three different sections in Gaul, in the area known as Gaul. And Gaul at that time encompassed the present-day area of France, northern Spain area of France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and that area, and then the parts of Germany. That was all part of Gaul. And the people of Gaul had a similar culture to the peoples of the British Isles, of England, Britain, and Ireland. They spoke a similar tongue, similar dialects were parallel to each other, belonged to the same family, shared a common vocabulary, and at one stage may have been mutually intelligible to each other. Also, we have tribes in Gaul and amongst the Belgae, that we also find in Britain and Ireland. And we have chieftains in Britain, and chieftains in Gaul, who ruled, who had the domain, who had the rulership over areas on the other side of the sea. There was interchange of people, also the religion. The religion was the Druid origin religion. Their religion was that of the Druids. The Julius Caesar writes, describes them at some length, and he says that anyone who wanted to become a Druid or to learn about Druidism had to go to Britain. So Britain was, as if to say, the center of the Druid religion, but which was shared by them all. There are quite a few points of similarities and quite a few indications that they were of Israelite descent. So one of the points is their very name. We call them Celts, but that is not actually what they called themselves. We don't know what they called themselves on as a whole, but we do know that there's a name that quite a few tribes were known by, that they frequently used, and that comes quite close to being a generic name for all of them. And that name is Hiberni or Iberi. And this name, Iberi, is a generic name for them, or it should be in ancient history. And it is also a Western way of pronouncing the Hebrew word Ivri or Ibri, meaning Hebrew. In other words, they call themselves Hebrew. Now, we're going to use names. We use a lot of names. And this can tell us something. The similarity of names indicates a similarity of origin. It doesn't necessarily have to be that way. It's not absolute proof, but it's a strong indication. When you take the strong indication and you link it up with other names, other indications, you get to a point where you cannot say it's a coincidence. But I was just, I thought I'd give an anecdote of my own experience, that sometimes names can be misleading, just so that we know where we're treading. When I came to Israel, I was a young man. I was unmarried. I wasn't. I came to Israel in 1974. After that, about a bit more than 2 years after that, a bit more perhaps, I joined the IDF, went into the Israeli army, and I had different experiences in the Israeli army. So at the beginning, I was training. I was in the middle of Sinai. The Sinai Peninsula once belonged to Israel, or Israel controlled it, ruled over it, and had army bases all over it. And Israel would be better off if that was still the case. Now it's used as the Egyptian army is the one who has bases all over it, and the Egyptian army seems to be preparing itself to attack Israel from it. But at that time, it was the Israelis who had the bases and had the preparations, and they had gotten them from the Egyptians by taking it by force from the Egyptians, after the Egyptians had attacked them and killed a good many of them, and had designs to wipe them out, and had been rebuffed. And that is how the Sinai came into the hands of the Israelis, and they gave it away for reasons of their own, and God willing, they would take it back, and I just hope that it doesn't cost them too much, if anything. So we're getting to make a short story shorter. To make a short story shorter, I was in the middle of Sinai, and I was doing a course, a basic course, and on a base. And on this base there were about a couple of hundred people, okay, a few hundred people, a larger base. And I had my name, okay, I had a name. This was my name that I had when I came to Israel. And there was somebody else on the base with the same name as me. They had exactly the same name. And he was also doing a course, not in the same field, but in a related field. Okay. So this person with the same name as me, walking around, and he had then my now grey, white hairsuit adornments. That is my hair, then was blonde, reddish blonde, and it was quite impressive, and had a beard. And this person who had the same name as me also had the same coloured hair. And he had blue eyes. I think he had blue eyes. My eyes are actually grey, but you wouldn't notice it. You'd consider them blue unless you got really close up. Have a good look. So, and he also had glasses, like I have glasses. And I'm a bit taller than him, but not much. The build of his body was similar. And he came from South Africa. Okay? And he came from South Africa. And he's walking around. And then we were, most of the soldiers there were Israelis. So Israelis have some bonds amongst them, have people with fair complexion. A lot of them are darkish, or darker than me at least. So everything's relative. So we both stood out. And we never got around to talking to each other. I don't know why. I saw him here and there, saw him walk around, saw him talking to others. He's quite open, talking, extroverted. I too am not shy. I'm prepared. I am quite able to go up to people I don't know and talk. So let me introduce myself and so on. For some reason, there's something holding me back and something holding him back. So we never actually got around to talking. But being there was against the statistics. We had the same name. We were both English speaking. We both looked similar. we both were from English-speaking areas. We both had other similarities. We may well have been related. I regret not having stopped and spoken to him and tried to clarify that. But we had all these similarities, and there was no reason why we should have had it. And that didn't end, the similarity didn't end there, because when I left that base, when I left it, I went somewhere else, and they gave me my documents, all my documents in a folder, and you took what they gave me, and I went to where I was supposed to go. When I got there, a portion of the documents weren't mine, they were his. I even had his documents on me. So what's the statistical probability of that happening? Two people with the same name, the same physical features, in an area where these physical features are not commonplace, and other things, and also documents. I had documents on me. So a historian could come along and take all that and say, prove. He could prove that we are one and the same person. Yeah. That is what an historian would do, and it would be right from a historical point of view. The overwhelming, there's quite a lot of evidence of proofs showing that I and this other person were one and the same personality, but we weren't. We didn't even know each other. So that shows that our similarities can be misleading and don't necessarily overwhelmingly prove anything, but nevertheless historians use them and we use them, but we keep on using them. That is, we're not satisfied with one proof or one similarity, one piece of evidence. We want more and more and more and more, and all the time we add to it and confirm it and check it out. Sometimes we revise it. Sometimes some things we have to reject them. So that's the way things go. And this is what you do, work with what you have. And then also an historian works with what he has, and historians indicate that these peoples, or a good portion of these peoples in the West, were descended from ancient Hebrews. They were descended from ancient Hebrews. So, one of the points that shows the similarity between them is the very name they were given. They were known as the name they gave themselves. The name they were known by was Yair, meaning Hebrew. That is the name they were known by. Celts, the term Celtic is a modern term. The last couple of 100 years, it was not used by them, or it was not used by them the way we use it. In Hebrew, the word Hebrew is derived from the root Iber, Abba, Ever, literally meaning over. And it sounds like over. Ever, Abba, over. And that's what it means, over. It says that Abraham in the Midrash says Abraham stood on one side and all the rest of the world stood over on the other side. That is why he was called Abraham the Hebrew, because he stood over the other side apart from them. Over can mean Passover, wanderer, someone who walks around. And this was a name the Hebrews were known by. Abraham the Hebrew is the term used in the Bible. We find the prophet Jonah. Jonah was a prophet in the land of Israel. Jonah, the prophet, he was told by God to go and prophesy against the city of Nineveh, the Assyrians in the city of Nineveh, and to warn them to repent and do better, to repent and reform their reprobate ways and wicked machinations. And he didn't want to, because he knew that they were volatile, that they were liable to change their mind, that they would be quite quickly willing to repent if they were caught they were in danger by not doing so, but they wouldn't hold out to it. As soon as things got better, as soon as the danger passed, they would go back to their own ways, and therefore, and they would harm the Israelite people, as indeed they did. So he took a ship. He took a ship that was going to Tarshish. Tarshish is in Spain. It's near the Gibraltar in Spain, not far off. It was an important emporium. It's a place where the Phoenicians used it. Actually, the founders of Tarshish were probably of Greek origin or similar to the Greeks. But at that time, it was of Phoenician culture, and the Phoenician ships used the place. There were also Phoenician settlers there. And Israelite settlers, as we have shown, they have place names showing the presence of Israelites there, and he was going to Tarshish. And on the way to Tarshish, he was swallowed up by a great fish, some type of great sea creature, swallowed him up, and then regurgitated him onto dry land, and before that happened, he'd been on the ship, and he'd fallen asleep on the ship, and then a storm had come along, and the storm had started to throw the ship about, and they knew that this was being done because there was someone on the ship who had incurred the wrath of forces, supernatural forces. So they took a lottery, and the lottery fell on Jonah, and they realized that Jonah was the one for whom this disturbance was coming about. They asked him who he was, and he says, I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who has made the sea and the dry land. See Jonah 1:9. So Jonah described himself as an Hebrew. That is how they described themselves. Also Joseph in Egypt described himself as a Hebrew. And also to Pharaoh described him as a Hebrew. The Israelites, the forefathers of the Israelite people, were known as Hebrews. And the Hebrew is what they were known as. Another related point that will be worth noting at present, we'll come back to it perhaps, and the related point is that so-called Celtic languages, those that we know, the languages of Brittany, language of Brittany in the west of France, not Britain, Brittany. It's the name of an area of a province in the west of France. It was famous in World War II. It was famous scenes of fighting when the Allies invaded France. That was one of the places that were contesting in the early days of the invasion. It's known as Brittany. And they also spoke a Celtic language. We have records, recordings, and people study that language, know a bit about it. We also have the Welsh language, and we have the Irish language, and we have the Scottish language, and they are about the only languages of the so-called Celts that we know about. But we know by place names and other points that the language was once very widespread in Western Europe. And we assume that everywhere it was similar to what it was in the British Isles. In the British Isles, these languages in Welsh and Irish, in Gaelic and Scottish, they have similarities to Hebrew. They have an underlying structure, an underlying build, one could say, similar to that of racial African Semitic languages. Their build, the way they put together, the way they use words, is similar to that of Hebrews and related peoples, and also the numerous names and nouns and usage of words and the vocabulary are similar to those of Hebrews. And this language is consistent with having had a Hebrew origin. This other language was also grafted upon it and also influenced it. But the very language has Hebrew roots. And these others have mentioned this. The whole books have been written about it. But modern books and ancient books. I have a book concerning comparing Hebrew to Welsh, and the biography in the back of this book is several pages, and there's literally hundreds of books since the 1600s, 1500s that have been written on this subject. A lot of people have noticed it and written about it. And over again, they've come up with new proofs and been tuning it over. It is difficult to deny that to some degree the Welsh and Irish and Scottish are derived from Hebrew or have Hebrew affiliations. You should note that in Hebrew, the letter bait, can be pronounced as a V. It depends on where it falls in the sentence, what vowels, what consonants become before its pronunciation, and how it is used. So sometimes the word Hebrew or it can be pronounced as Ibri or Iberi, and sometimes can be pronounced as Ivri.
Yeah, I have a question, Yair. You mentioned about this new discovery you came across in Talmud. I'd like to ask you to speak about that discovery more extensively.
Okay, I'll give it over to you very quickly, but I also wrote an article of it, and I'll give an analysis of it at some length. But now, since we have a couple of minutes, I'll go over very quickly. This is how it goes.
Yeah, that's great. If you can mention a few more words, and then I look forward to the article.
We have in Isaiah 10. It said 30. Isaiah 10 verse 30, it says, raise your voice, Gallim, hearken Elisha, and anecdotes. Or in King James it says, lift up your voice, O daughter of Gallim. O daughter of Gallim, cause it to be heard unto Elisha, O poor anecdote. When English Standard Version says, cry aloud, O daughter of Gallim, give attention, Elisha, poor anecdote. So it says, daughter of Gallim. So now in these verses, the prophet is calling out to a list of places who have to take heed, who have to be warned that the king of Assyria is able to come and conquer them. Okay, this is in Isaiah 10. And you can look it up, verse 30. And he's calling out to these places. So the Talmud says that not all these names called out are actual places that he's calling to. He's also speaking to the Hebrews. And I have looked it up. You can find the Steinsaltz translation on the web in English of this section. And it says, from the Talmud, Sanhedrin 94b, it says, Rav Huna says the wicked Sennacherib, that is Sennacherib, the name of an Assyrian king who exiled a portion of the Israelites. It's also used in Talmudic and Midrashic literature as a generic term for all of the Assyrian kings who participated in the exile of the Israelites. Remember, the Assyrians are the ones who took away the 10 tribes and exiled them. The Assyrians, they took away the 10 tribes of Israel and exiled them. They were exiled after the Assyrians. Sometime after the Assyrians, the Babylonians came and took away the tribe of Judah. But the tribe of Judah was taken away to Babylon and returned after 70 years. And it returned and re-established the kingdom of Judah, or something of the province of Judah. Re-established something on which they had before, whereas the 10 tribes never returned. Okay? So some get confused between the Assyrian exile and the Babylonian exile. First came the Assyrian exile against the 10 tribes. He also, Sennacherib also wanted to do the same to Judah, and he besieged Jerusalem, and he came up with all his army. He came up with all his army, and he besieged Jerusalem, and they encamped around the walls of Jerusalem, intending to attack Jerusalem in the morning. That night an angel came down and killed 185,000 of his soldiers. So he went back to Assyria, and in Assyria, whilst he was offering up sacrifice to his God, he was murdered by 2 of his sons who fled to Armenia.
Wow. Got his comeuppance.
Yeah, so that is the story of Sennacherib. But before that happened, Isaiah lived through those times, and he's warning the cities or the townships of Jerusalem or around Jerusalem that were before Jerusalem to beware, because the Assyrians are coming up and they will conquer it. And they did. It says they conquered all of the cities except for Jerusalem. All of the settlements were conquered except for Jerusalem. This is the settlements is given, and this is these settlements. And this is what Isaiah is saying in this verse in Isaiah 10:30. It says, "Raise your voice, Gallim, hearken, Aisha, and Anathoth," and so on. He's warning them. He says, "Pass through Migron and Michmash." He deposited his baggage. They passed Mahar, Bara, and so on. The Talmud goes on about it, length describing it, elaborating at some length of what the verse says. So it says where it says Gallim, Gallim, this is in the name of a place. It is in the name of the place.
Mm-hmm.
It says, the prophet is saying to the congregation of Israel, "Cry with your voice, O daughter of Gallim." Gallim is another name for Israel. Gallim is cognate, is synonymous, interchangeable with the term Hebrew. Gallim is also the name used for the inhabitants of Gaul. And in Midrashic literature, Galia is the name for Gaul. And in addition to the Gaul, you had in the region of Gaul that is known as Galia, you had the Belgi, you had the Galati, and you had the Celts, or the Galli. In English, it's written as Gaul, but the Romans called it Gaul, Galli, and some Midrashic literature they refer to it as Galia. Galia is the name given, and Galia, according to this, is another term for Hebrew. And more on this, when I began this research about 44 or more years ago, I began researching before then, but when I began seriously researching it, I spent a lot of time at the Hebrew University Library. They have a world library of universal European standards on Give It Round. The Hebrew University Library, major library of Israel, and I spent time reading, and I came across a few books in French of people who believed that they were from lost times, and they mentioned this Gal being another name for Hebrew. And Gal, in this section of the Talmud, Gal in Hebrew literally means heap. Gal is heap. And you have a wave. Waves are called Gallim because they're heaps of water. Or Gal can also mean a small hill. So you have the Galilee. So people from the Galilee, also known as Galli. And this is a name given to the Gauls. So as I said before, the same name does not necessarily mean absolute identity, but it's an indication. use more proofs and other proofs. It adds on to the total body of possibilities that when you get to a certain depth, they become certainties. So that's what we have.